In this video, we're going to make a Unity UI slider, and we're going to make it work with virtual reality. So to make that work, we're going to be using the GoogleVR SDK. So I'm going to get the GoogleVR SDK imported right now. And because I'm only going to be developing for Android, I don't need to bring in the iOS or the 32-bit plugins. Now this is GoogleVR SDK version 1.0, so I'm actually going to get error here. I'm just going to click cancel. We can safely ignore that and clear out that error. Now we're ready to get started. So if we were to go to the GoogleVR prefabs and bring in GearVR viewer main, that would turn our main camera into a GoogleVR camera. And so we're ready to go for that. Except to give us a little perspective here, I'm going to add a plane and put the camera over it. And if I wanted to move the camera at all, or to just set up the camera rig properly, the camera needs to be a child of another game object. So I'm going to bring the camera to a child here and just call this VR main. And make sure it's at 0, 0, 0. Okay, everything looks good. Now we're ready to get our canvas in here. So I'm going to right click here and UI canvas. Now because I made the canvas, it also created an event system. You do need the event system. If you don't have one, make sure to create one. So I'm going to look at my canvas now. For VR, instead of doing anything with the screen space, we should put the UI in the world space. And for the event camera here, I'm going to drag in main camera. And we got the graphic raycaster on there, so we need that for interaction. And so everything should be set up here, except the problem is this camera is absolutely massive. Now the camera's height, like a player height, should be somewhere about 2. So I'm going to set the camera to 0 and put the VR main up to 2. So that's where the player's head is basically at. So this canvas is huge in the world. I'm going to say for this tutorial that this is like a computer screen or a TV screen. So I want this to be a lot smaller. I'm going to put 0.01, 0.01, 0.01 for the scale and just bring it back to 0, 0, 0. Now that's still pretty big in the scene. It's bigger than 10 units. So I'm just going to put 100 by 100 here and take a look at our size. There it is. Now that looks about right, I guess, for a computer screen or a TV screen like that. So now that we got the canvas set up, I'm going to add the slider to it. All right, so the slider is by default 160, so it's bigger than this canvas is. I'm going to make the canvas 200 wide, and there we go. So now it's a widescreen TV, but that looks fine, and that looks like a pretty good size. If I were to press play, there it is. Now I can't interact with it yet. In order to get interaction working, I need to go to the prefabs UI folder in GoogleVR and bring in the GVR.prefab, put it onto the main camera so it's a child. And now if I press play, the dot is not responding to the slider. And the reason why is because we need to go to our event system. We need to add the gaze input module and move that up above the standalone input module. So now that we got the gaze input module, the GVR dot as a child of the main camera, we have a raycaster, a graphic raycaster on the canvas. So we should be able to interact with this, and I can see that yes, the dot is properly bouncing on the slider. And if I were to put my mouse here and click, I can move the slider with my head. So here we got with the GoogleVR SDK, the default Unity UI elements. If we have the event system with the gaze input module, everything's just going to work right out of the box. Now, I want this to work like a like a gaze button. So when I look at it, it starts to fill up, and then it performs some action. So to do that, we're going to need to put a custom script on here, but let's fix the slider. Now, first of all, because I'm not going to be interacting with the handle at all, I don't want to click on the handle. I want this just to respond with the gaze. So I'm going to delete the handle. We don't need that at all. Now we're just left with the background and the fill area. So if I look at the slider and I bring the value from 0 to 1, I can see that, first of all, at 0, there's still a little bit here. And then when I go all the way up to 1, it doesn't actually go to the end. It goes almost to the end, which that would look fine if it had the little handle on it, but we deleted the handle. The slider looks kind of funny, and I want this to go away. So I'm going to click on the fill. I'm going to see it has a width of 10. So I'm going to make the width 0, and that's going to make that completely gone. So if I go to the slider again and I increase this, it's not, there's nothing there when it's a 0, which is good, but it still doesn't fit. There's a little space here and there's a little space at the end. Now, before I go any further, let's look at the slider. It says interactable. We're going to uncheck this. We don't need that interactable anymore because that would be, I guess, how we were interacting with it right before this. But I just want to interact it with gaze. So we're going to uncheck that. We're going to have no transition. And let's fix this fill area. So I'm going to click on the fill area. And I'm going to press T on the keyboard. Now I can see what the problem is. The fill area goes from here to here. And if I look at the margins, you'll see that there's a 5 margin right here. It shows it. And if I click into here, you can see the 15 margin right there. So I'm going to put 0 in here, and I'm going to put 0 in here so that the fill area fills up the entire area. And the fill itself has been set to a width of 0. So let's go to the slider now. And it looks good now. And I start to slide it up, and it completely fills exactly like I want it to. Now there is something funny that happens. At the progress of at a value of 0.01, you get this little circle here, which looks kind of funny. 0.02, it's still there, and 0.03, it's still kind of there. Now by 0.04, it looks like the slider is just begun. Now, instead of fixing this, I'm just going to consider that the user will never see this happen. It'll happen so fast that the first thing they're going to see is a value like 0.05 or 0.04, and that looks fine. So we could go all the way and get this little graphical bug fixed, but I don't think the user will ever see that. So it's not important, and we're moving on. The slider is configured exactly how I want it to look. Now we just need to make it respond to the gaze input. Let's create a script. We're going to add it to the slider component itself, and I'm just going to call it VR slider. VR slider is a C# script. So I'm going to get that opened up, and let's get this script written quickly. There's going to be a couple of variables. One public float, which we're just going to call fill time. And I'm going to set that to 2 seconds. Now, that's just how long it's going to take when I look at it to completely fill that up. I'm going to make sure that this is set to 0 when I start, because I want it to start at 0 and go up to 1. So it's going to take 2 seconds to fill that up. And we're also going to need the slider itself, not slider joint. And that's my slider because I call it my slider if it's on the same game object that the script is on. And it can't find slider, so we need to say using Unity Engine.ui. So it has the slider now. So when the script starts, we'll say my slider is equal to get component slider. And just in case this script can't find one of these, we'll log an error. So we'll say if my slider is equal to null, equal null, and I spell null, then we'll just say debug.log. Please add a slider component to this game object because it couldn't find a slider. Now, considering it's found the slider, and I know it will because this script is right here next to the slider, we're ready to write our first function. It's going to be a public function. It's going to return void, and I'll just call this one pointer enter. It's the function that's going to be called when the VR gaze looks at the slider. We're also going to need a function for when the gaze leaves the slider, so we'll have pointer exit. So let's finish up the vars here. We're going to have a private float, which is just a timer that's going to count up to the 2 seconds that we've set. And we're going to have a private boolean that is called gazed at, and that will be true whenever the player is looking at the slider. And the last var is a coroutine. So we're going to say private coroutine, and this is the fill bar routine. Now we're going to need to write that coroutine here in just a moment. But before we do that, when the player looks at the slider and we have pointer enter, we're going to set gazed at to true. And then we're going to populate this variable, this coroutine variable. So we're going to say fill bar routine is equal to start coroutine, and now we need to put a coroutine in here. Now I haven't written one yet, so we need to do that. We're going to say private enumerator fill bar, and right now it's going to give us an error because this returns null, but we can fix this error real quick because we want to call fill bar. So we're going to fill bar routine is equal to start coroutine, and that is fill bar. There we go. So when we look at the slider, we're going to say timer is equal to 0. So reset the timer, and then while timer is less than our fill time, which is how long it's going to take to fill up that slider. So while the timer is less, let's increase the timer. So timer plus equals time.delta time. And then let's set the value on the slider. So my slider.value is equal to timer divided by fill time. And then we're going to yield and return null, which is going to make it just loop to the next frame. Okay, so if we have this pointer enter function fired, then it should start the fill bar coroutine, and it should set the timer to 0, and it should fill up the slider. But before that'll work, we're going to have to add one thing here. We need to add an event trigger to the slider game object, and we need to add an event for pointer enter. And I'm going to bring this VR slider script in, and we're going to say VR slider pointer enter. So when the pointer enters, this function will get called and the coroutine will get started, which should fill that up. And there it goes. It did it. Now we're not done writing the script because when my pointer exits, it doesn't stop or anything. So let's finish it up. And as soon as I start the game, it moves it. So I'm just going to get this up out of the way a little bit so that I have to put my mouse in. Perfect. It's almost done. And so let's finish this script up real quick. When the pointer exits, we're going to need to handle that. So let's say gazed at is equal to false. And then we're going to say if fill bar routine. So this variable, and if it's not equal to null, so there is actually a coroutine that's running, then we're going to stop that coroutine, because as is, it's going to get stuck. This coroutine is going to be stuck looping through here. And when the gaze exits, so we're going to need to say stop coroutine, and it's going to be fill bar routine. And so that's why we had to make a variable here for the coroutine, so that we have the ability to stop that coroutine when the gaze exits. So let's see what happens here. When the gaze exits, it's still counting up. And the reason why is because we haven't gone to our event trigger and added the pointer exit event. And for the pointer exit, we want to change this to the pointer exit function. So now when the pointer exit, this function is going to get called. Let's see if it works. Perfect. The only thing we wanted to make it do is reset that progress when the gaze leaves. So we're going to say the timer is equal to 0f. And we also want to say my slider dot value is equal to 0f. So the timer gets reset, the slider gets reset. And let's see what happens. All right, it looks like it's working pretty good. Now we just need to handle what happens when it gets all the way to the end. So let's go back into our IEnumerator. And we are still in the while loop. We're going to say if gazed at. So if the player is still looking at the bar, then we're just going to let this function continue. And then we're going to say timer is equal to 0f. We're going to set my slider value to 0f. And then we're going to yield break. So now we've handled the timer and the slider variables when it gets to the end. Now let's just make something happen, because we're going to want to call some sort of load a level or do something. So I'm going to make a new function for that. I'm going to call it on bar filled. So the bar has been filled completely, and we're going to want to do something now. I don't know what we want to do, so we will just say do something amazing. All right, so once that bar has been filled and we're out of that while loop, let's go ahead and call our on bar filled function. And we can look at it and look away and look at it again and look back. But if we look at it all the way to the end, it should do something amazing. And if I look at it again, it does something amazing again. I think everything's working great here, so the last thing to do is to get some comments put in here. I should have done it while I was writing the script. I'm going to add some comments in 3, 2, 1. Okay, here it is. How long it takes to fill up the slider. We got our private vars. We got the start, pointer enter, pointer exit. And then fill the bar up. When the bar starts to fill, reset the timer until the timer is greater than the fill time. Add time to the difference between frames. Set the value of the slider. Wait until the next frame. If the user is still looking at the bar, go on to the next iteration. And then if the user is no longer looking at the bar, reset the timer and leave the function. And once the timer has been reached, go ahead and call the function the bar has been filled, and do something amazing. All right, I hope this helps you out a lot, and if it does, make sure to give it a like, share it with someone, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks, guys. Stay tuned for more VR tutorials, videos, all kinds of stuff coming up right here on the channel. See you soon.